The UFC, the pinnacle of mixed martial arts, has seen its fair share of rising stars flicker and fade away, sometimes prematurely. In the unforgiving world of professional fighting, even the most promising talents can meet untimely demises in their career. Welcome to the MMA Mayhem. Subscribe and let's dive in. These are the stories of 10 stars who, for various reasons, the UFC seemingly and pointlessly let slip through their fingers. From promising prospects to once established contenders, these fighters left fans wondering what might have been if they were given the opportunities they deserved. In the world of mixed martial arts, matchmaking is an art, and when done right, it can lead to legendary showdowns and moments that fans will cherish forever. However, there are times when the matchmaking goes horribly wrong, leaving us scratching our heads, wondering why two fighters were ever pitted against each other. These mismatched battles can sometimes be painful to watch, both for the fighters involved and the fans. Let's take a look at some unforgettable MMA fights where matchmaking took a strange turn. Johnny Hendricks vs. Paulo Costa. Johnny Hendricks, a former welterweight champion, found himself facing the fearsome Paulo Costa in a matchup that left fans bewildered. Hendricks was on a downward career trajectory, having lost 5 of his last 7 fights and recently missing weight. Meanwhile, Costa was an undefeated powerhouse known as the Brazilian Hulk. This fight felt like a classic case of feeding the old to the young, and it ended with Costa beating Hendricks into retirement. It was a brutal way to say goodbye to a fighter who had once challenged the prime George St. Pierre. Meatball Molly vs. Aaron Blanchfield. Molly McCann, known for her entertaining style, was matched against Aaron Blanchfield, a rising star. While everyone aims for a championship spot, not every fighter needs to be in that immediate title contention mix. McCann had delivered exciting performances in the past, but her matchup with Blanchfield, who opened as a -500 favorite, did not do any justice to her momentum. Blanchfield secured a quick submission win, but it left fans questioning why McCann wasn't set up against strikers for more thrilling UK card appearances. Frankie Edgar vs. Marlon Vera. Frankie Edgar, a former lightweight champion, made the surprising move to bantamweight after a series of losses, including a devastating KO by Corey Sandhagen. His debut win against Pedro Munoz was followed by another knockout loss, this time to Marlon Vera. Edgar, a legend of the sport, seemed to be on the downside of his career, and his move down 2 weight classes was a risky choice. The matchup with Vera felt like a cruel twist of fate, especially when it resulted in another KO loss for Edgar. Kimbo Slice vs. Brandon Lee Hinkle. When Kimbo Slice burst onto the scene through his viral street fighting videos, the UFC saw an opportunity to capitalize on its fame, but instead of crafting thrilling matchups that would showcase Kimbo's brawling skills and entertain fans, the UFC made an inexplicable choice. They paired Kimbo against Brandon Lee Hinkle, a Division II national champion wrestler with 19 pro fights under his belt. It was a classic case of David vs. Goliath, but in this case, Goliath, in the form of Hinkle, dominated. The result was an anticlimactic fight that left fans scratching their heads. Why put Kimbo, the internet sensation, up against a skilled wrestler? It's a question that still lingers, reminding us that sometimes even the UFC's matchmaking can take unexpected, head-scratching turns. Little Nog vs. Ryan Bader 2. The first fight between Little Nog and Ryan Bader made sense, with Bader emerging as the clear victor. However, the rematch came a decade later, and Bader was looking to secure a title shot in the light heavyweight division. In contrast, Little Nog had become extremely inactive, with only 1 fight per year in the past 5 years. Bader was clearly progressing as a fighter, while Little Nog was on the decline. This mismatched bout ended with Bader winning by TKO in the 3rd round, leaving fans wondering why this fight was ever booked. Dan Severn vs. Pedro Hizzo. When Dan Severn lost to Mark Coleman in the inaugural UFC heavyweight title fight, it marked a changing of the guard. After a storied career as one of the most prominent wrestlers in the early days of the UFC, it should have been Severn's last fight in the octagon. However, 3 years later, he was brought back to face the emerging powerhouse Pedro Hizzo, who was 9-1, with his only loss coming against the reigning heavyweight champion Kevin Randleman. This matchup felt like a recipe for disaster, and it played out exactly that way, with Hizzo dispatching Severn in just 90 seconds with a devastating leg kick. It was a cruel end to Severn's UFC career. Korean Zombie vs. Max Holloway. Fans often clamour for specific matchups, but sometimes what they wish for isn't necessarily in the best interest of the fighters. The fight between Korean zombie Chan Sung Jung and Max Holloway falls into this category. While the fight did end up being spectacular, with Holloway earning a third-round knockout victory, it could have gone horribly wrong. Holloway's volume striking could have left Zombie battered and bruised. Considering Zombie's prior loss to Brian Ortega, it felt like a mismatch that could have ended much worse. Fortunately, the outcome was less severe, but the potential for one-sided brutality was a real concern. Michael Bisping vs. Kelvin Gastelum. Michael Bisping's remarkable story in 2016 culminated with him winning the middleweight title, taking on all comers, and even challenging a legend like George St. Pierre. After a KO loss to GSP, Bisping was in dire need of some time to recuperate. Instead, he was matched against Kelvin Gastelum, a fighter who was initially set to face Anderson Silva. Bisping had just fought 3 weeks prior to his encounter with Gastelum, and it ended in brutal fashion with a first-round knockout. The quick turnaround was ill-advised, and the result was devastating for Bisping, as Gastelum handed him another KO loss. It left a sour taste in everyone's mouth as the legendary fighter was denied a proper farewell. BJ Penn vs. Yair Rodriguez. Sometimes the UFC likes to test up-and-coming fighters against veterans, but the BJ Penn vs. Yair Rodriguez matchup was a grave mismatch. Rodriguez was a rising star with an 11-1 record, while BJ Penn, a legend of the sport, was on a downward spiral with no wins in nearly a decade. Penn's career had hit a low point, and yet he was matched against a young, ferocious opponent known for his deadly head kicks. Predictably, Rodriguez dispatched Penn in the first round with a TKO. It was a fight that never should have been made, and it only served to tarnish Penn's legacy further. Royce Gracie vs. Matt Hughes. The idea of a generational passing of the torch in MMA can be intriguing, but sometimes it's a mismatch that should have never seen the light of day. The fight between Royce Gracie and Matt Hughes was a classic example of this. Gracie, a jiu-jitsu legend, had been largely absent from the MMA scene for 6 years before facing Hughes. Hughes, in his prime, was a dominant force and outweighed Gracie by a significant margin. The fight played out as many expected, with Hughes securing a first-round TKO. This bout was a recipe for disaster, and it only served to highlight the vast gap between the old guard and the new generation. In MMA, matchmaking is crucial to create compelling and competitive bouts. When the matchmaking goes awry, it can lead to one-sided contests and often leaves a bitter aftertaste. These fights remind us of the importance of ensuring fair and thoughtful matchups that allow fighters to showcase their skills and provide fans with unforgettable moments. Thank you for watching. Follow for more.